What's up guys, Justin here with the RenderingEssentials.com, back with another Lumion new version video for you. So earlier this week, the new version of Lumion, Lumion 12, came out. So I wanted to make a quick video talking about some of the different features that were added in this newest version. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. So first off, there's a What's New page on the Lumion website that you can go to in order to start seeing what's new inside of this version. So you can kind of scroll through and there's a video in here, as well as some other notes down below about some of the new features. So you can definitely come down and check those out. There's also, if you scroll down even more at the bottom of the page, there is a link for release notes. And so release notes is really going to give you more information about what's actually contained inside of this new release. So if you are looking for more information about the new release and the new features, I would recommend jumping to the release notes first. I will link to that in the notes down below. All right, so the first new effect they've added is a volumetric spotlight effect. And so the volumetric spotlight effect is basically a spotlight, but it has more of like an atmospheric look to it. So basically what it does is it lets you cast a visible beam of light. So it's something that you would see if it's like foggy or something like that. And so we can turn that on inside of the light settings in our scenes. So let's say, for example, that we had a scene like this one. Let's go ahead and take it to nighttime, like this. And then let's say we were to add a light. So we're going to go into our content library under lights, and specifically we want to add a lamp like this one. So we're just going to click in here and add the lamp. We're going to move it up. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to jump over into photo mode, because this is an effect that you add in the effects settings. It's not something that you change inside of your viewport right here. So let's jump into photo mode real quick. And what we want to do is we want to scroll down into the option for lighting. So we're going to add an effect over here. You want to look under lighting and you want to look for the option for volumetric spotlights. Within the option for volumetric spotlights, what you do is you select the lights just by clicking on this right here. And click on the light, and you can see how that's going to add volumetrics to your spotlight. Once you do that, this is going to give you control over things like the density, so how dense the particles feel inside of that volumetric, as well as the intensity. So you can see how by controlling the two of these, you can control how foggy things look. If you jump back and you were to adjust the color of this light, so instead of this being like a white light right here, right, and let's say it had more of an orange, well now if we jump back, the volumetrics of that light are going to be orange. So this is something that you can use in order to set the mood inside of a scene, as well as just giving that kind of like, it's a different atmospheric feel using those lights. And then your fall off is just going to set how far this extends, right? So if you set your fall off very low, your light's not going to extend very far. If you set it, or if you set it high, it's not going to extend very far. If it's low, then your light is going to travel further. So this is definitely something that can add some of that emotion and atmosphere to your scenes. All right, so next, they've added a new object type, which is going to be Surface Decals. And so Surface Decals are great because what they can do is they can allow you to add a bunch of extra detail to things like your walls. So things like, for example, you can use this in order to make like little divots on your walls, or you can add like manholes and other things like that without having a huge like geometric issue or having to deal with a bunch of different textures or other things like that. You can access those inside of Lumion by going to the place function, and you want to look under effects, and it's going to be this last option in here for decals. And so there's a number of different decals in here that you can use. So everything from like asphalt damage, which you can look at in a second, things like plaster. So if I look at this plaster piece right here, for example, I could add a decal of plaster damage on this wall in here. And so adding little details like this is something that can really add a bunch of realism to your scenes. So you can see I could bring this in, and some of these are more pronounced than others, but they really allow you to add that extra little piece of realism without you having to do a whole bunch of extra work. And so you can edit those decals by clicking on the select function and editing those. There's going to be an option over here which allows you to adjust things like your transparency, right? So for example, for this one, maybe I don't want it to be quite so pronounced. I can turn the transparency way down. So I can set the range, which is going to be how far that goes to find a surface in order to set this on, as well as things like the orientation, so you can rotate it, do things like that. Then there's also tools down below that allow you to set how much the colors are blended. So a stronger blend, for example, is going to make this more pronounced. A lesser blend is going to make this kind of merge in or blend in a little bit more. So you can also blend the different maps associated with that inside of this object as well. And so another example of that is we might take that and on our asphalt, we might add a asphalt damage decal. So something like this. There's a collection of these right here, but you can use that in order to add like a patch or something like that on the surface. So if I was to click in here and set that, then we could use that in order to add a little bit of damage to the asphalt, which it's already using a texture that's got that damage, but this allows you to add those extra little pieces in here. Another thing that might be helpful in this situation is adding like a manhole cover. So you can use the manhole cover decal in order to place this on the street without you actually having to like model out the actual geometry of a manhole cover. So in the utilities category, they've added a new object type, which is the character billboard. So the character billboard, it's interesting they call it character billboard because you can really use it as a billboard for anything. But basically what it does is it creates billboard objects or flat objects that are always going to face your camera. So very similar to the Face Me components inside of SketchUp. But what you can do is if we jump back into Lumion and we want to jump over and we want to place a utility, you can see how that character billboard is going to be right here. So you can set that, and then if you come in here and adjust it, then you're going to be able to like load in a texture, for example. So let's say you had an image that you wanted to add in here, like let's just do something simple. So I'll take a snip of this toolbar right here. But let's say I was to save that object, then click on the option for load texture, and then double click to bring this in. Notice what that's going to do is that's going to bring that in as a billboard that's going to face your camera. So wherever I move, it's going to face where my camera is, like this. And then you can adjust it like a normal Lumion object. So for example, if you wanted it to be smaller, you can scale it down or up. So this could be massively good for like adding notes or call outs or other things like that, as well as it also would allow you to bring in those character billboard people. So they've also expanded their content library even more. They've added an additional 570 objects to the content library, everything from fine detail nature to different peoples and animals. It's just a little bit of everything in here right now, so that is getting bigger. So I will note that the Lumion installer and the installed file size is getting bigger along with this. So I do wonder if at some point this goes to something like more of a like cloud-based thing or something like that, because I think the install on my computer is something like 40 gigabytes. So it's a pretty massive collection. So I'm wondering if eventually this doesn't get changed to something where it's in like an online repository and you click a download button to bring it in. But I do also find it nice to be able to access all of those inside of a program. So in addition, they've also added some new materials in here, so 65 new materials as well. So again, I think Lumion probably has the deepest library of any assets that I've worked with so far. But like I said, the trade-off there is that the files are getting pretty big. But if you're looking for something that has a massive library of materials and objects built in, so that you can just kind of like drop in and go, then Lumion is a great choice for that kind of thing. And so one of the things they've done in order to kind of, I don't want to say combat, but in order to help you manage the number of different objects that are in your library, is they've introduced collections. And so what a collection does is a collection takes all of your objects that are of a certain type, so like this acacia tree, for example, and it puts them in a collection like this. So within that collection, what that means is that you can click on this in order to see all of those different kinds of trees, but it doesn't necessarily show every single one of them in here. So it was just kind of getting really big overall with the number of objects in the library. So these collections are going to make it a lot easier for you to access these. So in addition, notice how there's different tags in here. So each one of these objects has different tags on them down below. So when you click on this, for example, you get a little card now, and within the card there's different tags in here that you can search for. And because these objects all have tags associated with them, it basically does an automatic search of that kind of tree. So for example, I can look for broadleaf trees just by clicking on this, and that's going to pull up the results right here. Notice how you're not seeing collections in here when you do that, and even within this list you've got like 24 pages of results, which is why the collections is sort of getting necessary. But this allows you to quickly look for different trees of different types, or really different objects of different types inside of Lumion. And so just a quick tip, if you do want to look for what's new inside of here, you can type in a value of L12 and hit the enter key. So they've tagged all of the new stuff that they've added in this new release with L12. So, and if I click on one of these, for example, see how it says L12 right here? So you can see the new assets that have been included down below just by searching for that. So they've also added some improvements to the way that your imported models are managed inside of Lumion. So if you remember the way that you brought these in before, you just got this kind of like massive list of things in here of different models that you brought in. Now what you can do is you can basically create new folders, and you can put those objects inside of folders. So you can sort those by name or date. So if you did have different projects, for example, you could date them and have your newer ones showing up. You could also use like a 01, 02, etc. type thing in here in order to manage those different files. So it just gives you a new way to kind of manage the way that these objects are kept inside of your imported models folder, which I think has been something that's been sorely needed up to this point. Okay, so another great feature in this new release is they've improved the materials workflow so that you don't have to load things into the alpha map anymore. So now you can just load all of those different maps in without having to mess around with putting things in like an alpha clip or anything like that, or an alpha map, because that really had you working with like Photoshop and other things in order to try to get all the information you needed in here. So breaking this out so you can load those maps in here individually, I think is going to be a huge improvement. All right, so in addition, there's improved support for your groups function right here. So you'll notice there's an option right here. Let's say we were to take these characters and this bench, right? And I probably need to set this to select all categories so I can get all three of them. But what you might do is if you add something like this a lot inside of your scenes, then you might take all three of these and put them in a group, right? If you click in here like this, well, now what you can do is you can save that group by clicking on the save button right here. So when I click on the save button, that's going to pop up a window where I can control the group. And we might call this something like, and I'm going to put this in like city objects, but we might call this something like 2 men on bench. So something simple like that. And now if I click on that, click on OK, you've now been able to save that group. You can go back and you can access that really quickly clicking on the groups function. So see how this created a folder for city objects, and then I have the 2 men on bench group, so I can add that really quickly inside my scene. So if you do a bunch of city scenes and you want those characters in here, or if you got like different groups of like trees or plants or something like that, this could be a great way to save those to your library so you can access them quickly in the future. So they've also improved the functionality of the advanced move effect so that it just makes a little bit more sense with the way that the tool has now been set up. So it's a lot easier to add keyframes. So for example, let's say I was to set a keyframe right here, and then we'll say maybe like a second later I want this car to have moved down the street, right? So all we would do is we would just come in here, select the car, and then move it over here, and then you can just click in here in order to set this keyframe. Again, so setting and removing keyframes is a lot easier. I think this timeline makes a lot more sense, but just being able to click and drag this and move it along in order to make that change, I think is really valuable as well. So you're now able to adjust that, and this just makes a little bit more sense, giving you the ability to adjust those different keyframes. So there's also something that feels kind of minor, but it really affects the way that things work inside of the system. Notice how now we have these little context menus for everything. So for your copy and paste in here, so as well as save effect, other things like that. So where before, where you had a bunch of like menus and other stuff that you had to navigate, that's now contained inside of the actual objects themselves. So it's a little usability update, but it is going to make your workflow just a little bit simpler. So they've also added a LiveSync plugin for Autodesk FormIt. So if that's a program that you've been using, you can now live sync your Autodesk FormIt projects into Lumion. As well, there's a number of smaller changes that were made in here, like for example, you can edit the different license plates that go on the cars, as well as putting the different numbers on there. And then there's a bunch of different things having to do with just kind of the menus and the way those things work. So like for example, the lighting menu looks a little bit different than it did before with the way that you control this. So just a bunch of like minor changes that are in there that all do make the experience feel a little bit better, but they're not something where you're going to be like, hey, look at this massive new feature. So you can go in and you can look at all of those yourself inside of the release notes. So they have added the ability inside of the OpenStreetMap functionality in order to be able to actually rotate the way that you bring in that data. So instead of just being limited to a square like this, you can actually rotate that so you can bring different kinds of data. So I think that's going to be helpful for areas where things don't necessarily just run straight north and south, east and west. So for the autumn color effect, so you can now add, or the autumn colors option, there's now presets in here. So you can set this to target your trees layer. And what you can do is you can just use these presets in order to jump between the red, the green, and the kind of orange color. So if you do want to use that in here, this gives you those presets. You can jump between those really quickly. You can still adjust in the slider what the actual colors are going to be. So it's more just a quick way to jump between the different looks so that you don't have to come in here and mess around with a bunch of sliders. All right, so I will link to this full release notes in the notes down below. You can go check that out and read through the rest of this. So a lot of usability changes have been made in here. All right, so that's where I'm going to end this video. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about the features contained inside of Lumion or what you'd like to see in the future. I just love having that conversation with you guys. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new rendering content every week. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.